This was Ocean Parkway, a desolate stretch of road that runs through the south shore of Long Island. It's lined with brush and marshes. They were making their way through the grassy bank alongside the road when the officer noticed his dog picked up on a scent. What they found on December 13th was 3 more sets of human remains, all wrapped in brown burlap sacks. The victims were young women. 2 of the bodies were badly decomposed, and the third was skeletal remains. The victims were identified as Melissa Barthelemy, Maureen Brainerd Barnes, Megan Waterman, and Amberlynn Costello. Each of the victims had been strangled. These women became known as the Gilgo 4. All the victims were sex workers who had advertised on Craigslist, and after 48 hours, the police had no leads into who killed these 4 women, but it became clear that this was the work of the same killer.
The killer had arranged the remains about the same 500-foot distance from each other. In other words, the killer had used Gilgo Beach as sort of a trophy garden, sort of how hunters display their trophies on the wall. The police continued to comb Ocean Parkway and the South Shore looking for more clues, and what they found were 6 more bodies along the beach. On March 29th, 2011, the Nassau County Police discovered a human skull outside the entrance to the John F. Kennedy Memorial Wildlife Sanctuary. The skull was identified as belonging to a former sex worker named Jessica Taylor. Jessica was a 20-year-old whose body had been previously found nude, headless, and handless, sitting on top of a sheet of plastic in the Manorville area of Pine Barrens in 2003. The killer had also gouged out her tattoo, likely making it harder to identify her. She had last been seen working at Port Authority about a week before her body was discovered in 2003. Sadly, not much is known about Jessica's life. The new discovery of her skull brought the total of bodies to 5 found on the beach. On April 4th, 2011, 3 more bodies were found, one belonging to an Asian male who dressed in women's clothing, so police thought it was possible the victim was a transgender woman. They were missing 4 teeth and thought to be in their late teens to early 20s, and they had been dead for 5 to 10 years, and their cause of death was blunt force trauma. It's been theorized that this person was working as an escort, and the killer may have picked them up, and upon discovering that they were actually a trans woman, may have become angry and beat the victim to death.
The second body belonged to an African-American female toddler. She'd been wrapped in a blanket with no immediate signs of trauma. The third set of remains belonged to a formerly unidentified victim whose partial remains were found in Manorville, New York on November 19, 2000. When those remains were first discovered, police found her torso wrapped in garbage bags in the woods near the intersection of Halsey Manor Road and Mill Road. Her hands, head, and leg had been cut off. A head, right foot, and hands found on Gilgo Beach on April 4, 2011 were originally thought to belong to a 6th Jane Doe, but they were later identified as belonging to the same woman whose torso was found in Manorville a decade earlier. The victim was known as the Manorville Jane Doe until she was identified as Valerie Mack in 2020. She was identified through the use of genetic genealogy. Valerie was a 24-year-old girl from Philadelphia who was working as an escort. She went missing in 2000. Authorities identified her from a DNA sample that was collected from her son, Benjamin, when he was incarcerated in 2019. Police believe that Valerie and Jessica Taylor's cases are connected, as both bodies were found in the same area and disposed of in similar ways, and with Jessica's head found in Gilgo Beach, this would potentially link the 2 cases back to the same Long Island serial killer that killed the Gilgo 4. On the 11th, police found a plastic bag containing dismembered skeletal remains near Jones Beach State Park. These remains matched a torso that had been discovered on June 28, 1997 in Hempstead Lake State Park in Lakeview, New York. The torso had been placed in a green Rubbermaid container and dumped on a roadside near the western part of the lake. The torso belonged to an unidentified young African-American woman. On her left breast, the woman had a tattoo of a heart-shaped peach with a bite mark and 2 drips from the center, so she was nicknamed Peaches or Jane Doe No. 3 by investigators. The remains found in 2011 and in 1997 were officially DNA matched as the same person in December 2016. Investigators also discovered through DNA that Peaches was the mother of the female toddler, Baby Doe. Both were wearing similar gold jewelry, and both Peaches and Baby Doe are still unidentified.
So Valerie's bones were discovered on Gilgo Beach near the body of Baby Doe, east of Cedar Beach. And since Baby Doe's mother is Peaches, who was found in Lakeview, New York, and the Jones Beach State Park, there are more links that suggest these murders are all the work of the same killer. And there were more remains discovered near Peaches on April 11th. The police found a skull on the side of the road in Jones Beach, 6 miles west of where the Gilgo 4 were found. And this skull was matched to a pair of severed legs that were found nearby Fire Island on April 20th, 1996. Investigators knew that the Fire Island Jane Doe was a Caucasian woman between 35 and 50 years old. Her torso and hands are still missing. Very recently, on August 4th, after 26 years, Fire Island Jane Doe was identified as Karen Bergada. Karen was 34 when she was last heard from on Valentine's Day 1996. She was living in Manhattan at the time and working as an escort. Karen was not reported as missing. Her father moved to have her legally declared dead in 2017, and he was granted control over her estate and unclaimed assets. She left behind 2 children, Gary and Eric, who were not informed of her death by police. Her father, Dominic, died in 2022. Genetic genealogy allowed police to presumptively identify the remains as Karen in 2022. Then, using a buccal swab from a family member, her identity was definitively confirmed.
But obviously there was a lot of interest from the public in trying to track down this Long Island serial killer. But people were left scratching their heads. Here are some of the theories people floated. The first was that the killer had to know the area well, and even could be a local. There had to be some sort of reason he could spend so much time in the Gilgo Beach area and not be noticed or arouse suspicion. Many people believe the murders were the work of a cop, either active or retired. The New York Post reported that 2 NYPD cops, one current and one former, were under suspicion. The NYPD denied this, but the theory gained a lot of traction. It was widely believed the suspect had law enforcement ties. He was able to fly under the radar, but again, this could have just been due to the cops' mismanagement of this case. But again, he knew how to use burner phones and call from densely populated areas, so there was some thought put into their methods. The public was terrified, internet sleuths mobilized, and people speculated that the murders were the work of more than one killer, perhaps a team. But some thought it would be unlikely that the beach would be used as a dump site for 2 separate killers.
Which obviously, it's very common for public property to be the place where people will dump bodies, because
in this area is pretty remote. Some people online thought the burlap the bodies were found in could have been used by fishermen or clammers, since the killer could have been one. But the burlap was actually more the type used in sandbags that are commonly used as erosion control in the area, so the killer could have been a local. Or they believe that this person could have been someone who vacationed in Long Island, as the murders occurred during the summer season from Memorial Day to Labor Day. But the case went cold. In 2020, police released photos of a belt found during the initial 2010 Gilgo Beach search. They wouldn't say much about the belt, just that they believe it was handled by the killer and didn't belong to any of the victims. It's embossed with 2 initials. They either read HM or WH, depending on how you look at it. But from there, developments in the case seem to be few and far between. In January of 2022, the Suffolk County District Attorney's Office put together a joint task force to take a renewed look at the Gilgo Beach murders. This included a team that worked with officers in the Suffolk County Police Department, New York State Police, Suffolk County Sheriff's Office, and the FBI.
And that brings us to March 14th, 2022. A joint task force made a huge break in the case. After Amber was murdered, Dave told the police that she had gotten into a first-generation Chevrolet Avalanche, so the police knew the killer owned that car. Investigators pored over car registration records in Long Island until they found a promising lead. And on that day in March, they were able to identify a suspect by searching for the owner of that car. Police discovered a Massapequa Park man who had a first-generation Chevy Avalanche registered under his name. And the man fit the physical description that Dave had given in 2010. And not only were the Avalanche and the description significant, but they had already tracked the phone pings related to the murders that were connected in Massapequa. They also tracked the phone pings that were concentrated in Midtown Manhattan, right where this new suspect worked. And this man was named Rex Heuermann, and whether he knew it or not, police were hot on his trail. Maureen had been tied with 3 leather belts, and a female human hair had been recovered from the buckle of one of these belts, and that hair matched the DNA of Rex's wife. 2 female hairs recovered near Megan's head, and one found near Amber's head also matched Rex's wife. This doesn't speak to her involvement. Instead, she shed hairs normally, and Rex inadvertently had them on him. But there also was male hair found at the bottom of the bag that Megan's remains were placed in, and that DNA was a match for Rex. So now police had to make an arrest. Agents in black suits followed Rex as he walked down 5th Avenue, and then when he reached the end of the street, they got his ass. And on July 13th, 2023, Rex Heuermann was arrested for the murders of Melissa Barthelemy, Megan Waterman, and Amber Costello.